people who've had a "something is very wrong here and I need to leave" feeling but stayed. What happened? When I was a teenager, I was best friends with a girl who had an older brother who had mental health issues. This led to him also drinking a lot and generally being a dick. One night we were hanging out in her basement, and he came home drunk. As soon as I heard him coming down the stairs, I knew it was going to be bad. He walked into the room, looked at us and said, "What are you bitches doing down here?" My friend had a big shepherd chow mix and the dog immediately got up and stood between him and us, growling. My friend yelled for her dad and that set her brother off. He lunged at her and the dog grabbed him by the arm. Suddenly I was trapped standing on a couch, up against the wall. Her brother is on the ground kicking at the dog. The dog is clamped down on his arm and not letting go. My friend is next to me screaming for her dad. Dad rushes in, tries to separate them to no avail. Her mom had called the cops from upstairs, not the first time, and they show up. I shit you not, the second the cops came, the dog let go on his own and stood in front of my friend again. Cops arrest her brother, and her dad drives me home. I never went over there again unless she could promise me he wouldn't be there. In 5th grade, my math teacher made me and another girl stay after school. He said we did too well on the test. We must have cheated. I always got a weird feeling around him, but when it was just him and us, he was actually smelling our hair. When I finished my test, he told me to leave. There was no way that I was going to leave him alone with the other girl. I told him my dad said I had to walk home with the other girl. The teacher said I was lying. I was, but I told him to call my dad and tell my dad that he thought his daughter was a cheater and a liar. My dad was super friendly but built like a grizzly bear. He let me wait for her to finish the test. What a smart kid you were. I hope that teacher got removed and punished. I was a dumb 17-year-old. My friend, Joe, and I smoked weed a lot. One of them guys we brought it from, David, was in his early 30s, lived in a normal house, had a wife, who he was in the process of divorcing and not living with, and 1 or 2 young kids. But he sold a lot of stuff besides weed, pills, meth, etc. So he was involved with some sketchy people. But he was always really nice to us. A few times he fronted us weed when we couldn't afford it. One time I had the worst day ever, and he just gave me some just to be nice. So needless to say, what happened to him really scared and upset me. One night, sometime between 9 to 10 p.m., Joe and I went over to get some weed. David told us he was waiting on his connection to drop it off. It'd be about an hour if we wanted to wait here. I said yes, sure, no big deal. But Joe said, "No, I want to leave." I looked at him, surprised, and said it's just an hour wait. By the time we drive home and come back it will be an hour anyways. Joe said, "No, I think we should leave. I just don't want to stay here." I asked him why, but he said he just got a bad feeling. I will admit that David did seem off. He seemed really nervous and tense. There was a girl I knew from school there. Like everyone bought weed from this guy, she decided to wait. But Joe didn't want to, so I left with Joe. About an hour or 2 later we tried calling David, no answer. He never called back, so we just hung out and watched TV till the next morning. He still didn't answer, so we drove by there. We really wanted our weed. And the entire house is covered in crime scene tape. Part of the house is black and obvious there was an extremely recent fire that significantly damaged the home. We had no clue what happened and weren't about to stop and ask the cops there. I found out from the news, and then from friends of ours, what happened. Around 12 a.m., 3 guys kicked down the door. David and the girl I knew from school were sitting on the couch. They were both shot in the head and killed instantly. The guys then tried to set the house on fire to destroy any evidence. But a neighbor called the fire department shortly after they left, so the house wasn't badly burned enough to destroy much evidence. It took them years to catch the guys who did it. Friends party during school years. One of guys in the upper class, molested the host's younger sister. Ended up having their mother calling me in the middle of the night absolutely hysterical when they were trying to track him down. Ended up finding out also it wasn't the first time he had done it, and his folks were the kind who pay quite a bit to keep things out of the spotlight, and they finally met someone who didn't have a price tag. My old boss was an interesting guy. He came from a rough part of town and had a bunch of tattoos that really made him look scary, but he was actually a nice guy. I asked him about his massive chest tattoo, which led him to a story about his younger brother, John. John was a pretty gentle guy, but he started hanging out with blokes from his hometown that weren't exactly right in the head. One night they all hanging around drinking, as they did most nights when one of the blokes breaks out some meth. John politely declines and just continues drinking. The energy was getting really weird, guys breaking windows with their bare fists, bleeding all over the place, verbal abuse being hurled, just an all-round wonderful atmosphere. At one point someone broke out a tattoo gun and started doing home jobs. John really wanted to leave but couldn't because he was quite drunk, so he had to stay. Someone ended up spiking his drink, so while he was blacked out, one of the guys tattooed a swastika on his forehead. I was hiking down a trail and I felt like I was being watched. I've read a lot of stories about people going missing in the woods, so I was hyper aware of every little thing. Instead of going down this one path, I turned around and walked back. I still felt like I was being watched, so I power up my Bluetooth speaker, plug in my hiking MP3 and blast some heavy music. A few minutes later the feeling passes. A day later I heard someone was attacked by a mountain lion on the trail I was going to hike on. The lion did not like heavy metal. What a wimp. I had a very similar story while out fishing in Montana. I was alone on the river. It was getting dark, but I had been catching some fish, so I stayed out a bit longer than I knew I should. At one point I felt the sensation of someone watching me. The feeling kept growing stronger and I could smell an animal close by, so I decided to walk back across the river and get back to camp. That night I heard some strange moaning cries from what sounded like a really big animal, but I couldn't really tell what it was. The next morning someone at the camp next to me said that a mountain lion had given birth right next to her camp that night. I honestly feel lucky I wasn't attacked that night. My ex-boyfriend. It had been my first relationship in a while. Early on I started to get the feeling that he was lying about things, but it was only little things. Like he'd say he had some childhood illness, or had ran into Ariana Grande at a coffee shop. I tried to brush off the thought that he was making things up, because who would lie about random things? I stayed with him another 4 months, then realized he was also lying about a drug addiction, stealing my money I was giving him for rent and not paying our bills. So I probably should have trusted my gut and left sooner. My cat died. I was away for a week, in another country. I never usually worry about my pets like that. But 2 days and I was finding myself thinking about my cat more and more and being increasingly concerned about him. Few days and I was having dreams of me going back home in a rush. Instead, I stayed and thought I was projecting the stress of spending the week in an unknown place with people I didn't know a lot yet, and just missing my cat. Now that cat had come to me from the street, so whenever I left for a few days, that's where he'd spend his time. He would only respond to my call but not my friends, so I had no one to send to check on him. When I finally came home, I just rushed to all his spots and called for him. I did that almost every 2 hours when I was not working, for 3 days, including at night. Found him 3 days later, hardly breathing, but walking. Took him to the vet in a rush. Turns out he had cancer, and the tumor pushed against his lungs, etc. In the past week, something had broken and was filling his lungs with liquid. Had to put him down. I'm just glad I found him and he didn't die alone on the street. I would like to think that he held out until you got home so he didn't die alone and you would have closure. Cats are smarter than we give them credit for. I went on vacation for 2 weeks. First night I got home, my cat died in his bed, peacefully. I like to think that he waited for me. I had the opposite happen. Something very wrong was happening, but I was oblivious. And it worked out great. My friend and I were buying a 1/4 pound of weed together. We were getting it from a guy my friend knew, but didn't know very well. We went to his apartment to pick it up. Now, I'm probably a little bit on the autism spectrum, but because I'm from a time where you only got that diagnosis if you were nonverbal, I was emotionally retarded, and just taught myself habits to seem normal. One of them is, maintain eye contact even if it makes you uncomfortable. This is important. When we get there, the seller isn't alone. He's got a couple of kinda scary gangsta-looking guys with him. We sit across the table from them, and my friend hands him the money. Then the guy chuckles and says, "How about you two just leave the money and the weed here?" I'm bad on reading people. I just maintain eye contact and imitate what I see as a jocular mood. I laugh and say, "I think my friend would rather take the weed with him." The guys look at each other a second, then he says, "Okay," and gives us the weed. We leave and I notice my friend is white as a sheet and he says, "Those guys were going to rob us." I thought he was being racist and told him they were just joking around. He shouldn't have worried like that. "Didn't you see the gun?" No. I was focused on maintaining eye contact so I didn't look like an Audi. Apparently, the guy had pulled a gun after being handed the money. They thought I laughed at their robbery attempt and called their bluff. Do you have a similar story? Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one.